In the polished confines of a corporate boardroom, a casual handshake is met with disdain, revealing a deep-seated prejudice. "I don't shake hands with employees," declares CEO Vivian Holloway, her rejection a calculated slight aimed at Ethan Bell, a poised black consultant. But Vivian doesn't know that Ethan is a financial titan in disguise, and her arrogance is about to trigger a corporate earthquake. This is the story of how a moment of blatant disrespect ignites a powerful reckoning, proving that true power lies not in inherited privilege but in quiet competence and strategic justice. "I don't shake hands with employees," Vivian Holloway declared disdainfully, visibly recoiling when Ethan Bell extended his hand in greeting. A sharp silence filled the Holloway Innovations boardroom where 5 executives watched the scene with discreet smiles of approval. Ethan remained motionless for a few seconds, his hand still outstretched before calmly lowering it. At 42, this elegantly poised black man had faced similar situations throughout his life, but something in his eyes revealed that this time would be different. "I understand perfectly," Ethan replied with disturbing serenity, discreetly adjusting the watch on his wrist, a gesture that no one in the room could interpret correctly. Vivian, CEO and heiress to the Holloway Innovations empire, examined Ethan from head to toe with barely concealed contempt. His expensive suit and perfectly coiffed hair contrasted with the deliberate simplicity of the clothes Ethan had chosen for this meeting, a strategic decision she had completely misread. "I assume you are the consultant sent by our investors," she said, emphasizing the word consultant as if it were an insult. "I hope you won't take up too much of our time. People like me have important schedules." 3 hours earlier, Ethan had arrived at the lobby of Holloway Innovations exactly as planned, dressed modestly, driving an ordinary car with no visible signs of his true identity. What Vivian and her team didn't know was that Ethan Bell controlled Bell Global Investments, a fund that managed over $60 billion and was considering injecting $4 billion into Holloway Innovations. The receptionist had instructed him to wait in the common area for 40 minutes, completely ignoring his polite attempts to confirm the appointment. 2 security guards passed him 3 times, clearly instructed to observe his presence. Each slight was mentally catalogued by Ethan, who understood perfectly the test they were applying to the company. "Our numbers speak for themselves," Vivian continued, leafing through papers without looking directly at Ethan. "I don't see the need to explain complex concepts to someone who probably wouldn't understand our strategic vision." Ethan nodded silently, his hands folded in his lap as he watched every movement, every word, every gesture of contempt being carefully filed away in his memory. The small recording device in his pocket captured every syllable of the most embarrassing presentation Vivian would ever give in her life. "Any questions?" Vivian asked at the end of a superficial and condescending presentation, glancing at her watch as if every second in Ethan's presence was an unbearable waste. "Just one," Ethan replied, his voice maintaining the same calm tone he had used from the beginning. "Do you really believe that this behavior represents the values that a partner company should demonstrate?" Vivian laughed loudly, exchanging amused glances with the other executives. "Values, Mr. Bell? Our only values are profit and results. I hope your superiors understand that when you report back." While Vivian and her team reveled in what they interpreted as intellectual superiority, Ethan allowed himself an almost imperceptible smile. There in front of all the contemptuous stares, he stood firm like someone guarding a secret too powerful to be revealed before the right time. Vivian Holloway continued her presentation as if Ethan Bell were invisible, addressing only the other executives in the room. "As you can see, our numbers exceed all growth expectations," she said, pointing to charts on the wall with a gold laser pointer. "Excuse me," Ethan said calmly, "but those revenue figures don't match the public reports from last quarter. There's a discrepancy of approximately $300 million. The silence that followed was awkward. Vivian turned slowly, her face contorted into an expression of barely contained irritation. "Excuse me, but do you have experience in financial analysis of companies of our caliber?" "Some," Ethan replied, maintaining the same calm tone that was clearly frustrating her. Vivian laughed loudly, exchanging exasperated glances with Mark Olson, her vice president. "Mark, can you believe this? He thinks he understands our numbers better than our own finance team." Olson, a 50-year-old man with an air of superiority, leaned forward. "Mr. Bell, I imagine your supervisors sent you here with some kind of checklist to fill out. How about we simplify this? Tell us exactly what you need to hear so we can end this meeting." Ethan had faced this kind of behavior throughout his career. At 18, while still an intern at a small Chicago brokerage firm, he watched as wealthy clients treated black employees like inferior beings. At 25, when he tried to pitch his first independent investment proposal, he was kicked out of 3 consecutive offices before he even got a chance to speak. But every rejection, every look of contempt, every racist comment disguised as professional concern had forged in him an unshakable determination. While others gave up, Ethan studied 18 hours a day, memorized financial reports like poems, and developed an intuition for markets that bordered on the supernatural. Actually, Ethan said, adjusting his watch again, a gesture he had already made 3 times, "I'm more interested in understanding the corporate culture of this company, its core values." Vivian let out a genuinely amused laugh. "Values? Our only value is excellence, and we recognize excellence when we see it." She paused dramatically, examining Ethan from head to toe, something that is clearly not present in this room. The comment elicited muffled laughter from the other executives. Ethan remained impassive, but his phone vibrated discreetly in his pocket. A message from his assistant, Caleb, who was monitoring the situation at Bell Global's office. Ready to execute Phase 2 when authorized. Encouraged by her team's reaction, Vivian decided to intensify the humiliation. "You see, Mr. Bell, companies like Holloway Innovations operate at a level that requires a certain refinement, proper education, the right connections, experience in circles where real decisions are made." She walked over to the panoramic window overlooking the city's financial center. "I imagine it must be difficult for someone like you to comprehend the complexity of the operations we conduct here. It's not personal, you understand. It's simply reality." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "I understand your perspective perfectly, Miss Holloway. It's interesting how some people confuse inherited privilege with earned competence." The observation struck a raw nerve. Vivian spun around, her face red with indignation. "How dare you? My family built this company from the ground up. With an initial loan of $50 million from your grandfather's trust fund," Ethan replied softly. "Public information, by the way." Mark Olson slammed his fist on the table. "This has gone too far. Who do you think you are to speak to Mrs. Holloway like that?" For a moment, Ethan allowed his eyes to reveal a spark of the power he kept so carefully hidden. "Someone who knows the real value of things, Mr. Olson." Vivian took a deep breath, clearly struggling to regain her composure. "Very well. If you want to play auditor, let's give you something to audit." She pressed the intercom. "Sarah, bring me the Meridian project reports. All of them. The confidential ones, too." "The confidential ones, ma'am?" asked the secretary's voice, "especially the confidential ones?" "Yes," Vivian replied, her voice tight. "Our consultant here seems to have plenty of time for detailed analysis." What Vivian didn't know was that Ethan had already discreetly accessed the Meridian project reports through completely legal channels, information available to any serious investor. The project was 3 years behind schedule and $600 million over budget with clear evidence of mismanagement and possible corruption. While waiting for the documents, Vivian made a point of commenting loudly to Olson. "It's amazing how some people don't recognize when they're clearly out of their league." Ethan smiled discreetly, thinking of his office 6 blocks away, where a team of 15 elite financial analysts, graduates of Harvard, MIT, and Wharton, awaited his instructions. He also thought of the phone call he had received the previous morning from a CEO of Goldman Sachs, asking for advice on a $12 billion acquisition. Every word of contempt, every condescending glance was being carefully catalogued, not only in his memory, but on the high-quality recording device he carried. In a 40-minute meeting, Vivian Holloway and her team had provided enough evidence of discrimination to destroy her reputation forever. What those privileged people didn't know was that every act of contempt was writing their own sentence of defeat. Ethan Bell wasn't just a patient man, he was a strategist who understood that the best revenge is built brick by brick, word by word, until it forms an impregnable fortress of justice. As Vivian Holloway continued her performance of superiority, handing Ethan Bell a stack of documents as if it were a burden he deserved to carry, his phone vibrated discreetly on the table. It was a message from his CFO. Urgent meeting cancelled. Lead investor has postponed decision on the $4 billion. No reason given. Vivian's face twitched slightly, but she quickly masked her concern. Pros never come alone, she muttered, looking at Ethan as if he were personally responsible for all the inconveniences of her morning. Any difficulties? Asked Ethan, his voice maintaining that irritating serenity that made her increasingly frustrated. Nothing for someone like you to worry about, Vivian replied, furiously typing a response. Complex international investment issues, concepts that require sophisticated experience. What Vivian couldn't know was that 6 blocks away, Caleb Thompson, Ethan's right-hand man for 8 years, was executing the first phase of a meticulously planned operation. With a degree in finance from the University of Chicago and a specialization in risk analysis, Caleb had learned from Ethan that the best strategies are built on patience and precision. Phase 1 complete, Caleb typed into his phone, watching the Holloway Innovations building from his office window. Contacts at Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan alerted to ethical concerns at Holloway. $4 billion investment officially suspended pending investigation. The relationship between Ethan and Caleb had been born out of a situation similar to the one Ethan now faced. 8 years ago, Caleb was a brilliant young analyst at a Wall Street consulting firm, constantly passed over for promotions despite his exceptional results. Ethan, already established as an independent investor, had witnessed Caleb being publicly humiliated by a senior partner during a presentation to important clients. On that occasion, Ethan had done something few would have expected. He waited until the end of the presentation, approached Caleb discreetly, and offered him a position at his then small investment firm. I recognize talent when I see it, Ethan had said. And I also recognize when someone is being deliberately underestimated. Caleb never forgot that gesture. Together, they had built Bell Global Investments from the ground up, transforming it into the financial powerhouse it was today. More than business partners, they were soldiers in a silent war against the systemic discrimination they both knew intimately. Back in the Holloway Innovations conference room, Vivian handed Ethan a folder filled with contracts and reports. Here are the Meridian Project documents you were so eager to review, she said with venomous sarcasm. I'm sure you'll find it challenging to follow our advanced methodology. Ethan opened the folder calmly, his eyes scanning the documents with a speed that surprised even Mark Olson. Within 15 minutes, he had identified 3 serious accounting irregularities, 2 possible cases of overbilling, and a clear violation of federal environmental regulations. Interesting approach in item 7.3, Ethan commented, pointing to a specific line. Reclassifying operating costs as research investments may work in the short term, but it will certainly catch the attention of federal auditors. The silence that followed was deafening. Olson exchanged a nervous glance with Vivian, who for the first time since the meeting began looked genuinely uncomfortable. How did you? Olson began, but stopped, clearly disturbed by the accuracy of Ethan's observation. Experience, Ethan replied simply, continuing to flip through the documents. And I also noticed that the productivity figures reported here don't match the public energy consumption data for the Ohio plant, a discrepancy of about 22%. Vivian felt a bead of sweat roll down her forehead. That was information that only someone with access to very specific data could know. Who exactly are you? She asked, her voice losing its tone of absolute superiority for the first time. Ethan smiled discreetly, the same smile he had learned to use during years of being underestimated. Just someone who pays attention to details, Miss Holloway. At that moment, Vivian's phone rang again. It was her corporate lawyer, Dr. Peterson, with unusual urgency in his voice. Vivian, I need to talk to you immediately. We've received an informal notification from the SEC about a possible investigation into Holloway Innovations. Something related to irregular accounting practices. Vivian paled visibly. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Our accounting is impeccable." "Apparently, someone has provided very specific information about the Meridian project," Dr. Peterson continued. "Details that suggest an intimate knowledge of our internal operations." As Vivian struggled to process this devastating information, Ethan watched her growing anxiety with the same serenity he had maintained throughout the meeting. Every word of contempt, every gesture of superiority had been carefully catalogued. But more importantly, it had served as the time Caleb needed to execute the first phase of his strategy. Ethan Bell was not just a patient man, he was a strategist who had learned that true revenge is not built on anger, but on the surgical precision of someone who knows exactly where to strike for maximum impact. For years, he had collected information on companies like Holloway Innovations, not out of malice, but because he recognized the patterns of corruption and discrimination that always went hand in hand. Holloway Innovations, with its facade of corporate excellence, was actually a house of cards built on shady practices and held up by the arrogance of those who believed themselves untouchable. And Ethan, sitting patiently in that room while being humiliated, was about to knock down every card with the precision of someone who had spent decades studying exactly how these houses come tumbling down. "Everything okay over there?" Ethan asked innocently, watching Vivian hang up the phone with visibly trembling hands. Vivian forced a smile, but her eyes revealed the growing panic that was beginning to take over her mind. "Just minor administrative issues," she lied, unaware that every second of contempt she had shown was irreversibly sealing her fate. What she couldn't imagine was that the man sitting across from her wasn't just a victim of her prejudice, he was the architect of her ruin, and construction had already begun. Vivian Holloway's phone rang for the fourth time in 15 minutes. This time it was Sarah, her secretary, her voice trembling with panic. "Miss Holloway, the financial press is calling non-stop. The Wall Street Journal wants a statement on the allegations of racial discrimination at the company." "Racial discrimination?" Vivian repeated, her voice rising an octave. "What on earth are they talking about?" Ethan Bell watched Vivian's growing agitation with the same serenity he had maintained throughout the meeting. Discreetly, he took out his phone and typed a single word, "Now." 6 blocks away, Caleb Thompson received the message and smiled. "Phase 2 authorized," he said to his team of 5 analysts waiting at their computers. "Release everything." Within seconds, a 43-minute audio file was simultaneously sent to 17 financial journalists, 12 civil rights activists, and 27 institutional investors in Holloway Innovations. The file contained every contemptuous word, every racist comment, every moment of humiliation Vivian had inflicted on Ethan during the meeting. "I don't shake hands with employees," Vivian's arrogant voice echoed through loudspeakers in newsrooms across the country. "People like me have important agendas. It's just reality. Someone like you." Vivian was still trying to process the call about discrimination when Mark Olson burst into the room, his face red with panic. "Vivian, we need to talk now. There are recordings of you circulating online. Extremely compromising comments." "Recordings?" Vivian spun around to face Ethan, her eyes finally showing a spark of real suspicion. You recorded our meeting?" Ethan smiled calmly, pulling a small professional recording device from his pocket. "I recorded every word, Miss Holloway. Every gesture of contempt, every prejudiced comment, every moment you chose to humiliate someone you believed to be inferior." "That's illegal," Olson shouted, lunging toward Ethan. "Actually," Ethan replied, his voice remaining annoyingly calm, "in New York State, only one party needs to consent to the recording of a conversation in which they are participating. I consented to my own recording." At that moment, Vivian's desk phone exploded into a ringing frenzy. It was Richard Blackstone, chairman of the board of Holloway Innovations, and his voice came through the speakerphone with controlled fury. "Vivian, you have exactly 5 minutes to explain why our company is being associated with racist comments that are spreading like wildfire on the internet." Vivian tried to respond, but Blackstone continued relentlessly. Bell Global Investments' $4 billion investment was officially canceled an hour ago. They cited fundamental ethical concerns as the reason. "Bell Global?" Vivian repeated, confused. But our investor was Thompson Financial. There's no Thompson Financial, Ethan said softly, rising from his chair for the first time since the meeting began. It's always been Bell Global Investments. My company. The silence that followed was deafening. Vivian stared at Ethan as if she were seeing him for the first time, her brain struggling to process the devastating information she had just received. You're Ethan Bell, she whispered, her voice a mere thread. CEO and founder of Bell Global Investments, Ethan confirmed, pulling a gold business card from his pocket and placing it gently on the table. $62 billion in assets under management, listed by Forbes as one of the 50 most influential investors in the world. Olson grabbed the card with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the embossed credentials: Harvard Business School, former Goldman Sachs, member of the advisory board of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Over the past 6 months, Ethan continued, my team has thoroughly evaluated Holloway Innovations as a candidate for our largest investment of the year, $4 billion that would make this company the absolute leader in its industry. Vivian slumped in her chair, the weight of realization crushing her arrogance like a sledgehammer shattering glass. 6 months of evaluation. 6 months of observing how your company treats smaller suppliers, employees from different backgrounds, visitors who don't fit your aesthetic standard of success, Ethan explained. Today was my final test, an assessment of the ethical leadership of this organization. The phone rang again. This time it was Dr. Eleanor Vance, not the senator, but the director of corporate ethics for the National Association of Technology Companies. Miss Holloway, our organization has just voted unanimously to suspend Holloway Innovations' participation in our events until an independent investigation into discriminatory practices is completed. Vivian hung up the phone, her hands shaking visibly. This will destroy our reputation. Your reputation, Ethan corrected gently, has been destroyed by your own words and actions. I simply documented who you really are when you think no one important is watching. At that moment, Olson's cell phone vibrated with an urgent notification. It was a Google alert about Holloway Innovations. In less than 2 hours, #Holloway Racism had become a trending topic on Twitter with over 200,000 posts sharing excerpts from Vivian's recording. The company's stock has fallen 18% in the last 2 hours, Olson read aloud, his voice breaking. 3 major investors have already announced their complete withdrawal. Ethan watched Vivian process the magnitude of her fall. In a matter of hours, she had lost the largest investment in her company's history, destroyed her personal reputation, and become the national symbol of corporate prejudice. Why? Vivian finally asked, her voice small and defeated. Why did you do this to us? Ethan walked to the window, looking out at the city stretching below. Because companies like yours perpetuate a system where talent is judged by skin color, social background, or outward appearance. Because people like you use positions of power to humiliate those you consider inferior. He turned to face her directly. But mostly because I believe the business world can be better. It must be better. And sometimes for change to happen, examples need to be made. Vivian tried one last desperate gambit. We can work this out. Make a deal. Implement changes. The changes your company needs, Ethan replied, walking toward the door, can't be bought or negotiated. They must come from a leadership that truly understands the value of every human being, regardless of their background. Before leaving, Ethan stopped at the door and looked back one last time. I recorded this meeting not to destroy you, but to force you to face who you really are. What you do with this revelation will determine whether your company has a future or whether it will be just another example of how arrogance can destroy empires built on rotten foundations. As Ethan left the Holloway Innovations building, Vivian remained seated in her office, surrounded by the wreckage of a reputation that had taken decades to build and only 2 hours to completely destroy. Outside, reporters were already beginning to gather at the entrance to the building. While on social media, the hashtag Justice for Ethan was gaining momentum with thousands of people sharing their own experiences of corporate discrimination. Ethan Bell's revenge had been executed with the surgical precision of a master strategist. But as Vivian contemplated the ruins of her empire, one question remained: Was it possible that something better could emerge from this destruction? Or would Holloway Innovations join the graveyard of companies that chose prejudice over progress? 6 months after the seismic boardroom clash, Ethan Bell surveys the Manhattan skyline from his expanded headquarters. Bell Global Investments has flourished, its ethical investment model setting a new industry standard. Holloway Innovations, stripped of its leadership and public trust, has been acquired and is undergoing a top-to-bottom overhaul, a direct result of Ethan's calculated exposure of its toxic culture. Vivian Holloway's legacy is now a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that arrogance and prejudice have a steep price in the modern business world. Ethan's actions have sparked a global conversation about corporate ethics and accountability, proving that true influence comes not from birthright but from integrity and the courage to challenge injustice. His story is a powerful testament. The greatest victories are not about personal gain, but about creating a world where talent and respect are the only currencies that truly matter.